so we are welcoming back our good friend Rita Marie Johnson. She is no stranger to our community. She's been with us several times, and we always enjoy having her very thought-provoking lessons. Her talk this morning is going to be titled "Handling the Negative News of Our Time with Spiritual Power." I'm looking forward to that because I need to know how to do that. So, Reverend Rita Marie, just a little bit about Reverend Rita Marie is she's an educator, author, speaker, and award-winning innovator. She discovered a synergy between empathy and insight that maximizes social emotional intelligence, eliminates unnecessary suffering, and leads to life-enriching choices. This method is known as the connection practice, and it's been taught to over 100,000 people in 12 different countries. Way to go, Rita Marie. Wow. Pretty impressive. We are definitely glad that you are back this morning, and we certainly welcome you here. And Rita Marie, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Absolutely.
Well, it's always a pleasure to connect with all of you. Just always feels like coming home. So before we dive into the heavy subject of negative world news, I'd like to share my favorite joke. What do you call a Labrador retriever who does magic? A labracadabrador. Don't you love that joke? Okay. All right. So now let's face the fact, friends, that we have scarier world news going on right now than we have had in a long time. Talk about nuclear war is in the daily news. I'm just wondering if you all have heard of the doomsday clock. Can I see a show of hands? Just put your hand up if you know about the doomsday clock. All right. I don't know if you've heard about what it said in January of this year. I'm going to just educate you a little bit. If you don't know about the doomsday clock, I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint now and share a little bit about that so you can understand why I'm talking about this today, because I think this is actually one of the most important things that we need to learn to address in our time together. So I'm just going to read a little bit about it so we're all on the same page with this. It's a symbol created in 1947 that represents the likelihood of a human-made global catastrophe as determined by an organization of atomic scientists. Forgot my S there. The catastrophe is represented by midnight on the clock, and the danger is assessed each January by a certain number of minutes or seconds to midnight. So the main factors influencing the clock are nuclear risk and climate change. So the clock's original setting in 1947 was 7 minutes to midnight. Since then, it's been set backward 8 times and forward 17 times for a total of 25. The farthest time from midnight was 17 minutes in 1991, and the nearest is 90 seconds, set on January 24, 2023. So if you've been feeling a little nervous about all the news and the people talking daily about nuclear war, well, the atomic scientists have that concern too. So, you know, when we hear news like this, actually, I'm going to go back one. When we hear news like this, I'm just wondering what kind of feelings come up. This is going to be a little more interactive than normal. We're a small group. And so I'm just wondering what kind of feelings come up when you get that news that we have the 90 seconds to the midnight news this morning. So when you hear that, what feelings come up for you? And I'm looking for one-word feelings like scared. Any feelings, anybody?
Helpless.
What? Helpless?
Red.
Pardon?
Red.
Red. Okay. Hmm?
hopeless,
Hopeless. Anybody else? Frustrated,
Anxious,
anxious.
For me, it always is, always feel like it's a repeat.
Oh, so there's sort of a disappointment,
Right,
big disappointment of this repeat.
right,
Like, why we haven't got it yet?
right.
Yeah. Mhm. Okay. All right. Well, my intention isn't to scare you to death this morning. However, I really think this is an important thing for us to all to work through because we're faced with it every day. All right, I'm going to go back now to my screen share. So when we have feelings, negative feelings that come up when we hear news like this, we know that all negative feelings are because of a perception of unmet needs. So let's look at some of the unmet needs we might have when we hear things like this, when we hear about the doomsday warning. So I just listed a few: physical safety, emotional safety, well-being for all people, peace, and the evolution of human consciousness. Anyone have any other unmet needs? Just like 1 or 2 words or 3-word needs.
Trust.
Trust. Okay, let's just add that to the list. Any others? What did you say, Susan?
calm,
Calm. Yes, absolutely. And how about order? Like world order that works for everybody. All right. So
Empathy.
and empathy. Absolutely. Unmet need. All right. So with that said, because of our unity way of life, and because of the way we tend to frame things, we could actually stretch and have met needs when we get negative world news. I'm not saying we should, because it's, for all of us, as we thought about that this morning, we felt negative feelings. But if we had any positive feelings, then what are the possible met needs when we embrace our unity way of life that we might have when facing negative world news? Well, it might give us more awareness of our collective problems. When we get this negative world news, we're aware. So we have an increase in awareness of what's really going on out there. We are connected to the whole human family, to what's going on. We're not avoiding the human family that might be suffering in some way. We can trust in one power. That's where we put our trust. We have hope in knowing everything works for good, and that ultimately we have divine protection because life is eternal. So this is, how we tend to reframe it, but, oftentimes we try to do this before we really authentically feel that way. Is that right? And I see some heads nodding. Sometimes we try to put our unity principles to work, but we're not really feeling it. So are any other potential met needs when facing negative world news?
excitement that this is the time to act.
Okay. All right, Susan. All right. So it gets us going. It gets us going like, okay, now is our moment to really come through, to get excited. All right. But as I said, it's a little bit challenging, isn't it, to go from the doomsday warning to met needs, to positive feelings and met needs. That's pretty challenging to do that. So I'm going to return now to these needs, and we added some. We added empathy, and help me remember what else we added. Trust. So it's helpful when we consider unmet needs to get it down to a main need. And we could go into a debate about that this morning. There's a lot to discuss there, but I'm going to use my speaker privilege today and just choose for us to, in a because we don't have much time today to debate it. But let's just say that the main need is the evolution of human consciousness. Because for me, if we could evolve, as Dan was saying, he's tired of repeating the same darn thing, and that if we could evolve, we would have peace. We would have empathy, we would have trust, we'd have well-being, emotional safety, and physical safety. If we could evolve human consciousness into the greater expression of Christ consciousness. Does anybody have a problem with focusing on that as our main need this morning? Does that make sense to you? That's sort of at the bottom of it all. That's the foundation of the problem, the source of our challenge. All right. So now, let's go on to see what Charles Fillmore had to say about the evolution of human consciousness. Charles actually wrote in 1937, which was 2 years before World War II began, he wrote an article called, "Can Christ Prevent War?" I'm wondering if anybody has ever read that article. No? Susan and Dennis, ever heard of this one? Well, I was really pleased to read this because Charles knew intuitively we were going to have a world war, another world war. He wrote it in 37, 2 years before that war, because he intuitively knew it was going to happen. And he wanted to speak up and do his part to see whether something could be prevented. So here's what Charles said in his article, "Can Christ Prevent War?" So in terrible times, he says, what Jesus Christ did is Jesus Christ prayed. He prayed whole nights. He was not begging God over and over again to do what he asked. Jesus Christ was laying hold of the thought forces that bind the whole human family in the bondage of their own making. And he was setting them free with the freedom of his spiritual understanding. All right, so that's probably not news for us. We understand this principle. We understand what Jesus was about. So let's go on now to see what Charles had to say about the world he was living in. He said, if our world leaders would only see that there's a power behind this world chaos, that if invoked or even consulted, would straighten out everything for us. Sooner or later, we must come to a recognition of that guiding power. We must incorporate it into our civilization. Then we shall have world peace. And then we shall know what it is to celebrate the birth of the Christ mind. We shall know what it is to reincarnate in our mind and in our life that wonderful spirit which was in the Lord Jesus Christ. All right. So let's take a look then at what Jesus and Charles are basically doing in the face of negative world news. Number one, they didn't deny it was happening. They faced it. They brought their spiritual understanding of the Christ power to it through prayer, teaching, and in some cases, action. And you could consider writing an article action, for example, in Charles' case. So here's two good models of spiritual principle, Jesus and Charles. This is what they did. How can we do the same in our time? Let's look at some common strategies that we use for handling negative news. So here's one that, I may have used at one time, or you may have used, or you hear your friends use. And I'm not saying that any of these strategies are wrong. I'm just saying that each one I'm going to present has a downside as well. So I don't watch the news because I can't do anything about the world's problems and I want to stay positive. Now, the downside of this strategy is disconnection from those in our human family who are suffering and lack of awareness of the big picture that may influence personal decisions and actions to help, to make a difference. So those are the downsides of that particular strategy. Let's look at the next one. I watch the news because I care about the human family. Then I stuff my feelings of sadness, worry, and fear. The downside of this strategy is that stuffing feelings results in illness, depression, and apathy. You know, we learned this from Myrtle Fillmore, actually. You know, one of her big ahas in life was that she was stuffing her feelings. And after she stopped stuffing her feelings, she was totally healed. So this strategy has a downside. Okay, I watch the news and then vent about it to others as a way to release it. Anybody relate to that one? Boy, I can sure fall into that very easily. All right, so the downside of this strategy, venting actually deepens the neural pathways that have been impacted by the negative emotions. So your brain is more likely to return to those thoughts and feelings. You may think you're actually releasing them, but you're not. You're actually digging a deeper neural pathway. So it has its downside. Feels good in the moment to let it out, but it doesn't really help us. All right. Here's another common strategy. I watch the news and I see it as awareness that the collective is ready to shift and change things for the better. This awareness shows me what to pray for. The downside of this strategy, there's so much negative news coming at me, I get overwhelmed and don't actually pray. Anybody relate to that one? Yeah. All right. All right. So with the consideration of these strategies, we might want to look at why do we need to listen to negative news at all? You know, do we really need to listen to the negative news or not? So let's look at some of the reasons why we might want to listen to it. First, avoiding negative news does disconnect us from the human family. We don't know really what's going on in the bigger world. We are in our own little bubble, in our comfort zone, and that's a disconnect. So if we only focus on what is pleasurable or good in the world, in a sense, we aren't calling all energy good. The only way to see God in all of it is to see it as consciousness that is evolving, shifting into a higher vibration. So if we truly want to experience unity, we need to take it all in, including our darkest shadows, and stay aware. Aware. Okay, so we want to stay aware. However, we live in a world where negative news comes at us continually. It comes on our phone. It comes on our laptops. It comes on our TVs. It comes from friends around us. So we can't really just completely avoid it anyway. And so let's look now at what we do. How can we respond like Jesus or Charles? What can we actually do? Well, first of all, friends, we have to allow ourselves to feel it. When we feel sad or horrified from negative news, we need to shed tears and grieve. Grieving is important in this process. Remember, even Jesus wept. So when we release the tears, when we grieve, this keeps the experience, the fear, the sadness from being pushed into the shadow. However, we have a big challenge in doing this. If we're going to feel it, well, the problem is there's too much. There's just too much to feel all of it. It's coming at us from too many sources, so we get overwhelmed and we want to shut down. That is like a biological safety valve. We get overwhelmed with all those feelings, and neurologically, we shut down. It's like trauma. You know, when people are traumatized, they tend to isolate and become immobilized. And when we get traumatized by negative news, that's exactly what happens. Our system wants to shut down. So I found an interesting study. This researcher named William Ix did a study on empathy, and he found that when subjects spend just a little more time with a stranger, their ability to read that person was just as good as their ability to empathize with close friends. The magic time span for that, 30 minutes. Okay. So time is crucial to empathy, to feeling it. In other words, if we're going to feel it, we got to give ourselves some time somehow. We've got to have some way to get out of the overwhelm. So let's go to the next one here. So another professor, Mary Yang, the University of California professor, said this: neuroscience has shown that if things are happening too fast, you may never fully experience emotions about other people's psychological states, and that would have implications for your morality. In other words, empathy is critical to moral behavior, but it takes time. When we get overwhelmed with too many feelings, too much negative news, we don't have time to handle it in a conscious, healthy way. It's just not going to happen. And I imagine that all of us can relate to that. We get overwhelmed and we just want to shut down. We don't take the time to handle it in a conscious, healthy way. So what can we do then, friends? Well, what we can do is we can watch the news, but limit it so we can process it in a healthy way. But what is a healthy way? Okay, so what I'm going to ask you now, I'm going to stop my screen share, but you see the question here on the screen. What horrific or scary news did you hear this week? But please exclude US politics. We don't want to get into a political debate here. We just want to talk about anything that was horrific or scary that wasn't US politic related. So I'm going to stop my share for a moment and just here. Susan?
Well, Russia had its biggest bombing hit on a civilian target in Ukraine this week. And one of their majors, generals, announced a perfect strike afterwards.
Perfect strike. Yeah, so just imagine how you all feel about that. I'm feeling it right now. Just feeling the horror and the sadness. Not only of the lives lost, but of the human consciousness that is not fully expressing Christ consciousness. Sadness in that way of thinking. Thank you, Susan. Anybody else want to bring one up? Yes.
The crazy war in Sudan. The crazy war in Sudan.
The crazy war in Sudan.
Two generals and killing thousands of people.
Mhm.
Very, very sad.
Very sad.
I
Anybody
think,
else?
I think for me, personally, what really sinks my vibration, so to speak, is when I hear a child that was like an Amber Alert or something like that, or a child was abducted or harmed, or something that happened in a school or something like that. That really, yeah, it just really shuts me down emotionally and just kind of desensitizes me, because I do feel like I just don't know what to do, and my emotions are just numbness. I mean, I just don't even know what to do,
Yeah.
So.
Needed to.
Who said something? I missed that. Who just spoke?
There was a shooting in Texas. A guy was asked to stop shooting his rifle and ended up shooting 5 of his 10 neighbors.
Oh, yes. The mass shootings, unbelievable.
And Patrick, you had something?
That's what it was.
Oh, the Texas shooting. Yeah. All right, friends. So I want to share a way that I am working with in my own life, because to be very transparent, I've been having problems with this. It gets me down. And so that's why I'm bringing it to you today. We always teach what we most need to learn. And this is what I'm needing. I got to find a way to handle this that doesn't bring me down, that makes me feel empowered. And so I actually gave this message, oh golly, it must have been how many years ago, in 2000, let's see, it must have been around in 2018, something like that. I gave this message when I was minister at Unity of San Jose, because I was struggling with it then. And so I came up with a way to do it. And I did that for a while. I practiced it myself, but then I kind of let it slide. And so in preparing this message for you today, I've given it more thought, more prayer than ever before. And so this is something that is working for me, and that I'm going to, really use more, let's just say, I don't know if it's willpower, but more intention in doing this when I hear the news. So let me share what has recently worked for me and that I'm bringing to you today. All right. Oops. Okay. So, whoops, I went too far. So, when I hear negative news, I need to limit it, first of all, because I know that if I allow myself to look at the phone, look at the TV, look at the news that comes on my laptop, on my desktop, it's just too much. So I'm going to limit it. I am not going to let myself just be bombarded with negative news. And then to process it with conscious prayer and to help when I can. So for me, this prayer is conscious and efficient. In other words, I don't want to come up with a new prayer every time because it's too much. It feels like just too much. Already the news is too much, and I need to know exactly where I'm going in prayer when I'm faced with this negative news. So the idea is spirit. When I hear about neighbors being shot in Texas, I feel sad. I feel horrified. I feel worried. I feel shocked. And so I'm letting myself feel that now. But then I don't want to get stuck there, friends. I want to go to what I know. And what I know is that this awareness is needed for human consciousness to evolve. I don't want that to be going on in Texas and for nobody to know about it. Right? We have to know about it if we're going to shift it. So I know this awareness is needed for human consciousness to evolve. And so then the next step is so important. This is when I fill my heart with love for all involved. For the victims, for the perpetrator, friends. We've got to love people when they're most unlovable. That's our spiritual challenge in these times of such negative news. So this is when we literally go down into our hearts, and whatever helps you to generate authentic love, that we fill our hearts with love for all in the situation. And then also send the wisdom needed for all involved to grow from it. This, I think, is often a missing step in our prayers. We might send love, but we don't think to send wisdom, because love is the great connector, but we need the wisdom, because the wisdom is the great evolver. Wisdom makes us evolve. We grow, we get the lesson, we learn from it, we change. So yes, we send love, but we also send wisdom. And then lastly, if there's a way I can help, show me. If there is a way, there may not be a way. If there's a way beyond prayer, I can help, show me. And I'll act on it. So basically it's I feel, I know, I feel, I send, I act, if I can. I feel, I know, I feel, I send, I act on it if I can. That is my conscious prayer when I receive news and I allow myself the time to really process it. Because then I can be a part of the solution instead of part of the problem. If I just allow myself to get overwhelmed and paralyzed, I'm part of the problem. So that is what I'm working on. And I invite you to try it as an experiment. You know, if you like, I can send this PowerPoint to Dan or whoever would use it so that you could copy down this prayer if you'd like. Because this at least gives me a structure. I don't have to figure it out every doggone time. I have to know where I'm going with this prayer. And I don't want to not feel it. And I don't want to be overwhelmed and not ever get to spiritual principle. And I don't want to feel disempowered. I want to feel empowered, sending love and sending wisdom. And if there's something I can do, by God, I want to do it. So I've got it all in there. You could say, because I need it. I need every step of this. And I don't know if you're resonating to it, but I know in the past, like I said, when I first offered this message at Unity of San Jose, California, that it helped me for quite a while. All right, so next, I just want to summarize a little bit that we can handle negative news with spiritual power. If we can agree that the greatest unmet need is the evolution of human consciousness into Christ consciousness, then like Jesus and like Charles, we can help meet this need every day. Through our spiritual understanding of the Christ power, in unity, we understand what that is. Through conscious prayer that we can actually come through with. Conscious, I could even say efficient prayer, but heartfelt, conscious, heartfelt, efficient prayer. By helping the human family when we can, you know, through our actions, and friends, just by our example, by teaching others to do this same thing, to respond to all the negative news of our time in a conscious, healthy way. Why is that important? Because we know that each one of us matters, that we contribute to the overall consciousness. And if we allow ourselves to go into fear and overwhelm and apathy, we're not doing our part. We do make a difference. And can you imagine if people all over the world started handling negative news in conscious ways? If we can model this, how you handle this terrible news in a conscious way. You know, in my mind, it's like number one skill of our time, you know, that everybody needs to know how to do. Otherwise, we automatically become part of the problem. So I feel very strongly about it. And I'm going to do my best to practice and do better with it myself. And so now, friends, I'm going to close with a meditation. And in this meditation, I'm going to lead you through that prayer that I just offered, the one that I just shared. I'm going to invite you before we go into the meditation to think of something that for you was scary or horrific this week, maybe something other than we've already brought up, or it could be what we've already brought up. But to have it already in mind before we go into meditation, I don't want you up in your head searching for like, what's the worst thing I've heard this week? I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. Is there anyone who needs more time? raise your hand if you need more time, because I want to be sure you have something that you can do to work this before we go into meditation. All right. All right, friends. So now I invite you to bring your hands to your hearts. Let's begin with really a heart focus. We need to bring our big, beautiful hearts to the world this morning. And so I invite you to close your eyes and now focus down. Down we go into the heart. And let's breathe deeply as if we're breathing through the heart. And now just letting go. Letting go, breathing deeply into the heart, letting go to God. Living, loving spirit. When we hear negative news, or we feel sad and scared. And so now, friends, I invite you to say, Spirit, when I hear or heard this, when I heard this, I felt. Just take a few minutes with that. When I heard this news, I felt. And now we move on to the awareness that we know is needed in order to evolve human consciousness. We need to know. So I invite you now to connect with that knowing and to say to yourself, I know this awareness is needed for human consciousness to evolve. Take a moment to just say that to your innermost being. I know this awareness is needed for human consciousness to evolve. And now, friends, we're going to fill our hearts with love for all those involved in whatever news you received this week. So whatever helps you to fill your heart with love, fill it with love that you know, fill it with love for those you're close to, fill it with love first and then send it, filling it full, overflowing to all those involved in the situation that you heard about this week. And now, friends, we know that wisdom is in our very hearts, the wisdom that is needed, just as Charles Fillmore said. If we could just awaken our world leaders to that wisdom that is right there for them, the wisdom that each one of us in unity in our unit oneness community here, each one has experienced, we know we can trust that wisdom. We know that wisdom is real. And so I invite you to send the awareness of that wisdom, dependence on that wisdom, send that out to all involved in whatever news you heard this week. Send the wisdom. And now, friends, having tapped your own love, that divine love and that divine wisdom within you, I invite you to ask Spirit, is there any way in that particular situation this week that I can help? Just listening in the silence now. Is there any way that I can help with that situation in our human family? Friends, if something has come up, some way that you can help in whatever situation you've heard about, I invite you to set your intention now to act on that. Whatever has been revealed in prayer here, to set your intention to act on that. Now, friends, we end in knowing with all our hearts that Spirit is in charge of our world, that there is enough love, that there is enough wisdom, and we see human consciousness evolving efficiently into Christ consciousness. We celebrate that truth. We've experienced in our own lives what that feels like, how that changes us. We know that truth. And so we hold that truth for our world. We see the incredible power of love and wisdom in action in our world. And so it is. Amen.